catching your eye today? I mean, there's so many different news stories popping up left and right. I want to get your take, but I want to start at the very top of your priority list. What's the biggest news in wrestling, at least from your perspective this week, Eric?
I think it's The Rock and his involvement / lack thereof and the controversy surrounding it. I find it really interesting that Rock, commented to Dave LaGreca in one of Dave's most recent rants. It was really interesting, but I think the whole scenario, the way it's playing out, especially with the people involved, you wouldn't expect a guy like Rock to engage necessarily in the controversy, but he's clearly shown he's not shy when it comes to engaging with social media.
It really has been an interesting study in WWE this last week or so. Let's talk about The Rock's appearance on Pat McAfee's show. That does have a lot of people talking. He came on the show Tuesday after WrestleMania and gave his pitch for Cody Rhodes to turn heel and said why he didn't appear at WrestleMania 41. The exact quote is, "I was an advocate of that. Not turning Cody heel soon, but down the line. I like the idea of that. And this idea of way down the road, you give him a reason to turn, not based on titles, but it's his soul. And what that means, that affects generations." When we got to the Elimination Chamber, we were kicking around ideas, and Triple H said, "What about turning John?" I love it. The next thing is you've got to speak to John and see if he loves it. John loved this idea of turning, and there's this anchor here that I want to root it in. That's a real thing I've been experiencing the past 25 years. I knew then the best thing for the final boss is that we've established this thing with Cody's soul. I don't want to be involved in that. Let the final boss step back into the shadows. Let all the spotlight go to John and Cody, not make it about Cody's soul or John's soul. Let them do what they do. I called John and Cody after the Elimination Chamber, and I said, I think the final boss's work is done. We just pulled off the greatest angle in wrestling history. I'm always here if you need me, but it's best for the final boss to not be involved in that finish. What the hell do you make of this, Eric?
I don't even know how to frame it. It's unusual, to say the least. And if you take your emotion out of it and just step back and without any bias, ask yourself, does that sound plausible? Could that have actually happened that way? And I think the answer to that is yes. We weren't in the room. We weren't a part of those discussions. Is it a possibility that the way Rock laid it out was the way he really saw it? Absolutely. Does it have some holes in terms of logic? Sure does. And unless you're in that room and a part of those conversations, I don't think we'll ever know. It sounds to me like this is, Rock's explanation for why he did what he did. It's, on paper, I get it, but still, there's the issue that we talked about immediately following the last night, the second night, is you started a story and walked away from it. And look, if Rock wasn't The Rock, if Rock would have been any other, top performer in WWE, might not have had as much impact or residual effect, backlash. But the fact is, it was The Rock. And that immediately raised the expectations. And I don't think you can look backwards in the beginning of a story and say, well, I know that's how we started it, but I think I'm going to step away. You can do that. And obviously they did it, but not without a cost. And I think the controversy that we're hearing right now is the cost. I didn't get a chance to see Monday night. It sounds to me, based on what I've read, that Monday night they kind of reset the story and found a solid path forward. But yeah, this whole thing is just kind of a cluster, if you will, baby.
Yeah, it is not a good cluster. This is not a good look. I mean, it feels like I mean, I'm sure you've at least seen, we'll pivot and we'll come back to The Rock. I'm sure you've at least seen that WWE over WrestleMania weekend announced that they were going to be debuting a new Netflix show this summer. And it's described as WWE Unreal. For the first time ever, step into the WWE writer's room and outside the ring with your favorite WWE superstars, where the drama is just as intense off stage as it is under the spotlight. And there's a clip from the trailer that actually revealed what WrestleMania 41 was supposed to look like. And it shows basically the plan all along was Cody Rhodes and John Cena. We'll break down some of the rest of the card in a moment. But I find this interesting that we're led to believe that they've got all this drama and all this effort and all this time and work that goes into the writer's room. And Eric, you've been a part of that, or at least seen that process in the confines of WWE. That's accurate. But we're to believe that The Rock just shows up at Elimination Chamber and says, what if we turn Cena heel? And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. Like that to me, how do I reconcile either The Rock drops in and we just have to drop everything and do what he wants to do, or the writers aren't really doing anything. I mean, either way, this is a bad look. This is inconsistent with what we're presenting to the audience.
Two things can be true at the same time in this case. And I have been a part of a lot of writers' rooms to a certain extent in WWE, a much lesser extent in WWE, obviously. But look, that's what makes wrestling so unique, is that you can have a solid plan. You could have planned weeks or months in advance. Absolutely the best creative you can imagine laid out well in advance, in detail. Doesn't mean it's not going to change. And it can change for any number of reasons. We've talked about a million times. Injuries is the most obvious one. Contractual disputes is another one. These are situations I personally have experienced. Family emergencies that take somebody out, personal issues that oftentimes back in the 90s and early 2000s took talent out. Or if you're really lucky, somebody comes up with a better idea. And I'm giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, because although I don't know Rock personally, we've worked together a little bit, very little bit, had a few, conversations that were very brief. So I don't know him. And I also don't know John Cena on a real personal level. I've certainly worked with him a lot more, and I have a good sense of what he's all about, and as well as Cody. So there's nothing but respect for everybody involved. But that's one of the things that makes wrestling unique, is that you can have plans, and for any number of reasons, including a better idea that everybody goes, wow, I really like that. Sometimes you're faced with a choice. Do we go with an idea that everybody feels like a better idea? Or do we stick with what we've got because, well, that's what we have planned? And there's value in that. Don't get me wrong. Pre-production is the key to good production in every way. But sometimes an idea just hits you, even though you've done all the work, and you adjust on the fly.
We got to talk a little bit about the line that really caught Jeff Jarrett's attention. While The Rock was appearing on Pat McAfee's show, he's sort of breaking out exactly how he came to appear at Elimination Chamber. He says, I got a call from Ari Emanuel, who we know owns TKO. TKO owns WWE. He's been my longtime business partner and one of my best friends for over 20 years. And he said, we need help at Elimination Chamber. Ticket sales are a little slow. But beyond that, he goes, what we are finding is with Elimination Chamber, it's becoming the pay-per-view that's been interesting. Fans have had fun, but it's also a conduit to WrestleMania. And how do we create an Elimination Chamber that people must tune in to see? How do we create that? And he goes, right now, we don't have that. And he said, will the final boss show up? And I said, well, let me give it some thought. Let me get back to you. So I gave it some thought. I got back to Ari. I got back to Triple H and Nick. We had a call. I said, I have an idea. What's most important to the final boss? The most important thing to the final boss isn't titles. It's not money. It's not fame. Been there, done that. Grateful for that. The final boss wants your soul. So that's how we got going on this idea, but it lasted for exactly one show, and it didn't pay off at WrestleMania like a lot of people assumed. I mean, The Rock's involvement in the John Cena Cody promo at Elimination Chamber led to the historic turn of John Cena and the WrestleMania main event. So I do think it is what I might call a logical leap for fans to believe, since The Rock was the catalyst that turned John Cena heel. He's integral to the story. He'll be there at the payoff. And I think the reason people were so frustrated with night 2 of WrestleMania is not just Travis Scott's involvement, and I don't think that is a reason to be upset, but the time it took for him to get down the ramp, that's another story. But I think there was an expectation that if Travis Scott is here, because we last saw him with The Rock, we're going to see him. And to me, this felt like you do this bad gangbusters, awesome NWO angle, Eric, at the Bash at the Beach in 1996. But at the next pay-per-view, when we're expecting Hulk Hogan in his all black and white, gear to come out as Hollywood Hogan, instead it's just Ed Leslie, the guy we always see sort of tagging along. Here comes Ed Leslie, and he takes 3 minutes to get in the ring, and we're all looking around like, okay, we got it. We see him. But where the hell's Hogan? That's the way I felt, and that's the closest analogy I could make to this, because I do feel like fans, I don't think they hate The Rock. I think they're just frustrated that he wasn't there. What say you?
Clearly, it's funny how difficult it is to manage expectations. I mean, as a producer, promoter, whatever you want to call it, you need and want to promote the hottest thing that you can, and you want the expectations to be as high as they can be, especially for something like WrestleMania. But there's a cost associated with that, and you have to manage those expectations and meet / or exceed them. In most cases, WrestleMania always does, because it's just such an amazing spectacle in and of itself. And then you have the matches and the stories that get propelled forward. But you also have to manage your expectations. And if you're going to take the risk, and that's what this was a creative risk, according to Rock, designed to really put some steam on Elimination Chamber, which they did. And they raised the expectations, and they failed to meet them based on the creative expectations that they set. They failed to meet them, and this is the result. It's, I think, probably more online chatter. Obviously, I think the mainstream audience, while I would agree, probably left a little
So, Eric, we got cut off there in the middle of your answer. Do you want to sort of pick up where you left off there?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I lost my internet here. What were we talking about before we lost it?
We're talking about The Rock at WrestleMania and his non-appearance.
Yeah, and I think where I left off was probably talking about managing expectations. There's an expense in raising them, and there's clearly an expense if you don't meet them. And I think that bill has come due with the controversy that we're hearing. I think what I was also saying is that I think the mainstream audience, the 90% of people who watch WrestleMania at home, probably weren't nearly as affected by this controversy as the people who live for controversy and online chatter, debate, arguments, just general negativity. Those people are up in arms. Of course, they're overanalyzing and analyzing, and the world is telling us what they should have done and could have done. And it's not that they're wrong. It's just that I think the smallest percentage of the audience is making the biggest noise about this. And at the end of the day, it sounds like they picked it up on Monday. Stories going forward will drive interest, and they'll continue on. It was a speed bump in the big scheme of things. A disappointing speed bump, but it was a speed bump in the big scheme of things.
I do want to, you and I normally veer away from trying to talk about negative stuff. But I can't help but try to be a little negative in this, because I do want to put my tinfoil hat on and wonder about these conspiracy theories. We have seen and heard, even going back to last January, not this January, but 2024, when The Rock came back and was seemingly going to set up Rock and Roman at WrestleMania. There was a narrative online of people who believed that The Rock just dropped in, having not really paid attention to what WWE was doing, and he wanted to make the biggest WrestleMania in history. And we know that, what we got was Cody finishing the story, and we saw The Rock on night one, and it was indeed the biggest WrestleMania in history. The Rock wasn't at this WrestleMania, but this was the biggest WrestleMania in history when it came to attention, when it came to pay-per-view, when it came to sponsorship. Of course, when I'm saying pay-per-view, I mean gate and the media rights. And I mean, more people saw this between Peacock and Netflix, you would think, than ever before. So I can't help but wonder, why would The Rock show up the Tuesday after? It almost feels like he's explaining, hey, this was not my fault. I was at home on my couch. I think there was a lot of heat on WWE Sunday night based on where's The Rock? And for him to do the media appearance on Tuesday and say, oh, I was at home watching on a couch with my friends and family. That to me came off like there's more behind the scenes, more pissing contests. Maybe The Rock felt like, as we've all heard his promos, he wants to make history. He wants to be a part of the biggest shows and the biggest events and the biggest gates, and he wants to be the record maker. Well, if the rumors are true and this WrestleMania did like $80 million or something crazy like that, and they did it without The Rock, does that create a little bit of back and forth between certain figures inside the tent at WWE and The Rock? What do you think?
I don't know. My mind just doesn't go there. I mean, could it? Sure. Could there be some political tug of war or creative tug of war going on? I don't think there's any doubt that Triple H is in charge. I don't think there's any doubt that the creative team as a whole is pretty cohesive, just from the outside looking in. Could there be an issue with someone like The Rock? I mean, let's face it, he's got a certain amount of gravitational pull, given who he is and what he's accomplished. WWE is going to want to leverage that. I saw it with Vince, when I was there in 2019, getting Rock to show up at the Fox debut was like, premiere was like the most important thing anybody could focus on for quite a while. Of course, he came in at the last minute and he did his thing because he had a schedule. He's a busy guy. He wasn't part of, the day-to-day operations. He worked it into his schedule and was able to show up. But I also saw the collateral expense. We won't call it damage. The collateral expense, which is an incredible amount of time invested by writers and producers and all of us really working together, not knowing how to time the show, because Rock also has a history of, if you give him 7 minutes, plan on 17, but it works. So nobody's really bitching about it too hard. It generally delivers in a big way. But there's a conflict with a guy who's not there full time, who's not a part of the process. I used this example the other day. It's like when you're producing a television show, there's a million threads. It's like 1,000 count bed sheet. There's a million threads that bring it all together, and each one of them are as critical as the other, because if one thing goes wrong, the whole production crashes in many respects. So you need to have redundancy. You need to make sure that every thread in your production sheet is woven tightly and there are no loose threads. Because if we pull one of those threads, and before you know it, the whole thing unravels. And when you're not there every single day, absorbing some of the nuance involved with talent and stories going forward, if you're not a part of that, it's easy. And it has nothing to do with bad intentions or being an egomaniac or thinking you're better than everybody else or you're more important. It has everything to do with it. You take a guy like Rock, who, okay, I'm available, I can do this. Creative has to, they're writing on the fly. And a lot of times it doesn't matter, because someone like Rock's going to do what Rock feels most comfortable doing. He's earned that right. And he's delivered. So he's going to come in with a certain expectation that he's going to have some flexibility and control over what it is he does, because he does. And that is also true for guys like Cena and Cody and Hulk Hogan. Everybody made a big deal about creative control. Well, if you listen to these guys talking, they all acknowledge that the talent has to kind of sign off on this stuff. So you've got a lot of people that have strong creative influence, if not creative control. And if one of those guys comes in and decides, yeah, okay, I'm going to pull this thread right here because I can fit myself into that spot without realizing how it affects everything else around it, that's a real problem. It's the price you pay to bring in someone like The Rock, in my case, to a large degree, Hulk Hogan, especially early on when he had a limited number of dates. And Hulk would want to come in and he had an idea, had months to think about it, weeks to think about it, people pitching him ideas all the time. And he would come in and he would pitch an idea that he was passionate about. And it might have been a great idea, but it affected 25 other things. And I think that's probably what's happening with Rock, is his intentions are good despite the perception that people have of him. I think he just really wants to be successful, whether he's the record holder or not. He's associated with WWE. People know he's on the board. They know his relationship there. He wants it to be successful. That matters more to his overall reputation than his individual stature. I think too much is made of that. It's like, oh, his ego's so big, he wants to be the guy that sets the record. I don't believe that to be true. I think he wants to be involved in really successful stuff because it's way more fun and it's a better use of his time and the gravitational pull that he brings with him. But I think it's more just a matter of being totally aware so that your presence doesn't disrupt. And I think that's what's happened here. Communication's probably part of it. Like I said, Rock not being there full time is probably part of it. It's tough to just drop in and then drop out. It's a tough way to do business for everybody, including Rock.
I can't help but feel like what you said a few moments ago, as soon as you started, is being challenged. What I mean is, you said something along the lines of, hey, we all know Triple H is the boss. He's in charge. I don't know if that's true. I know day to day that's true. But even in The Rock's interview with Pat McAfee, he didn't say, I got a call from Triple H. I got a call from Nick Khan. He says, I got a call from Ari Emanuel, who we know owns TKO, and TKO owns WWE, and he's my friend and business partner for 20 years. He's framing it like this was a call that was made to him sort of outside the tent of WWE. No disrespect to Ari Emanuel, but he's not in that writer's room. He doesn't know what the plans are creatively, I would imagine, for the next 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years. But he is looking at a ledger and he sees, hey, we can sell more tickets than we have for Elimination Chamber. And I think they wound up selling like 27,000 seats or something. The run, but certainly that Rogers Center could have held more. But that note to me feels like maybe that's The Rock intentionally being divisive. And Dave LaGreca, who hosts Busted Open Radio, he absolutely went off on Sirius XM all of Monday and some of Tuesday. And then The Rock actually responded and he says, hi, Dave. The business is a complete work. Always has been, always will be. Every aspect of it, every match, every interview. Please join me, Cody, Cena, Brian, and the rest of us for our creative discussion so you can expand your perspective. Until then, stop ranting. It's not healthy, my friend. Enjoy the show. P.S. Tell Bubba I have Grand Marnier and hush puppies for all of us. What do you make of this? I mean, even the comment, please join me, Cody, Brian, and the rest of us. The rest of us?
I really don't even know how to respond to that. I was shocked, like I said, opening this up, I was shocked that Rock took the time to even respond to that. Especially because all it's going to do is continue to stir the pot. And maybe we're all just, gullible. And because we think we know a lot about the wrestling business, we're all jumping on some of these theories because it kind of makes sense based on the impression we have of the people involved. And it kind of fits a dramatic, behind the scenes story, drama conflict. Maybe that's just our nature as wrestling fans to look at that. It's probably why, you know, the internet wrestling community exists and why dirt sheets exist, because people just are fascinated by speculating and about what could be and what the theory is behind why people say it and what people do. Like, I think it's unfortunate. I'm surprised Rock responded to Dave. And I get your point, though. You know, he's made that, even that message made it sound like he's in that writer room every day, which.
Well, hang on. Who's not mentioned? Let's go back to the quote. I mean, because this is what sticks out to me. Please join me, Cody, Cena, Brian, and the rest of us. He's not mentioning Triple H one time. He's not mentioning Bruce Pritchard one time.
See, I didn't even notice that.
Kowski one time. Like,
I didn't even notice that. Maybe I should have. I didn't notice that, really.
That's what stood out to me the most. Like, you know, here you are saying, and I'm not arguing that, Triple H is at the top of the org chart when it comes to content. He is the chief content officer, I think is what they're calling him. So instead of a COO, he's the CCO. But still above him, we know on the org chart, there's Nick Khan. And above him, well, there's Ari Emanuel. And Ari called Rock. The whole thing just feels like, man, there is some uneasiness and upheavalness. I almost wonder, did The Rock later, after he said, hey, I'm done after Elimination Chamber, was he interested in showing up at WrestleMania because he knew it was going to be a huge financial success? And Triple H and WWE said, oh, we got it. We don't need you to just drop in by helicopter every now and again and just throw a grenade in the middle of our creative. We got it. We'll be fine. Just sit this one out, bud. Is that what happened?
No. I mean, there may be people thinking that, but nobody said that. And with Ari Emanuel, who I've never met and don't know, I know of him by reputation, as a lot of people do. He is Rock's agent. He was Rock's agent first and foremost up until recently. I don't find any of this. I'm just not as compelled to buy into the conspiracy. I really do think it was bad communication. I think Rock jumped in, decided he was going to try to have some fun at Elimination Chamber. I don't think there was a lot of thought put into what do we do at WrestleMania until it started getting closer to WrestleMania. And for whatever reason, Rock didn't participate. I don't know what that reason is. I just don't think that with Ari at the top of TKO, that there would ever have been a conversation internally. It's like, nah, Rock, we got you. Don't worry about it. Maybe next time. We don't really need you this time. I don't think anything like that was said or implied or inferred. I just don't. But I do. Man, I'm not there. You know, people are people. They all have flaws. We all have flaws. I certainly do. I've got an ego. I've got pride. Sometimes I think that I'm absolutely right and find out otherwise. You know, performers in particular are guilty of that. You know, they're passionate. They're not necessarily people who think like analysts. They're inspired by creativity, and sometimes they're inspired over the wrong things at the wrong time. I don't know, but I just don't see it being as political or nefarious necessarily. I'm not saying it's not. I just don't see it that way. Now,
Eric, let me ask you something.
If this continues over a period of time and we keep seeing this back and forth, you know, I'll probably have a different opinion. But right now, I just think bad planning, bad execution, everybody's covering their ass. That's what I think all this is.
You don't think 2 WrestleManias in a row is enough evidence? How many WrestleManias should he try to fuck up in a row before you think that he was involved? All right. Listen, I'm asking that tongue in cheek, but I do want you to. I'm gonna ask a question here, and you're gonna immediately get defensive. I want you to not immediately take a defensive position, and I want you to really listen to the question before you decide to have a visceral reaction. I want you to think back to your WCW days, and you had a creative team, you had a committee, whether it was Kevin Sullivan or whoever else was involved. You had a committee, and you guys have worked on creative tirelessly for several days, perhaps weeks, maybe months. And every now and again, the biggest draw in the history of the business would show up and have a legendary comment about that creative on the day of the show. He'd stroke that Fu Manchu and he'd say something along the lines of, that doesn't work for me, brother. Now, I'm not talking about whether or not Hogan made the right call. That's a conversation for another day. I am asking you, whenever Hogan would use that creative control card and stroke that Fu Manchu as often or as infrequently as that happened, how would that move by Hogan and that reaction by Hogan be received by the rest of the writing team? That writing committee in WCW, when Kevin Sullivan was given the note back from Hogan, hey, we know we've built this pay-per-view for 6 weeks or whatever it is, but Terry says that doesn't work for me, brother. What else can we come up with? How did the team in the writer's room on the day of where he drops that grenade, how do they respond to that?
By the way, that happened not exactly the way you laid it out and not as cut and dry as you laid it out, but that type of thing happens often. It's why I spend so much time talking about, the best laid plans of mice and men, no matter how great it looks on paper, is subject to change for any number of reasons. And in my case, flashing back to WCW, I'm not defensive about this at all. It's a great question. And I've experienced it, a lot of it. So I feel qualified to answer it. In WCW's case, what would happen if we had been working on it? First of all, if we had been working on a plan for weeks and months, the general idea of that plan, the premise at the very least, and probably the finish involved in it, would have been discussed with Hulk in particular because of the nature of his contract and his limited schedule. We had to know in advance, especially early on, as best we could, what we were doing, who we're doing it with, and what the outcome would be. 3 things that we had to know. Now, there's a lot of stuff in the middle that we would figure out as we went and over a period of time, but the basic tent poles of an idea would have been discussed. It's not like everybody sits in a room, comes up with an idea, and then sends it over to Hulk to see if he liked it. That wasn't the process. Hulk would have been involved incrementally throughout the whole period of weeks or months, whatever the time frame would have been. Now, I think a fairer or more practical question, because it happened, was what happens when, even though there's been all this communication, don't want to suggest there was an abundance of it, but we spent time communicating. There was buy-in initially, and there was buy-in throughout the majority of the process. What would happen if, for example, Hulk or anybody else would have come in and said, that doesn't work for me? Okay, tell me why. That would start the conversation. If there's a reason why all of a sudden it's not working, let's figure that out if we can. Sometimes you can very easily. Sometimes you can't. That takes you to another issue. But for the most part, that never happened. With the exception of 97, when we were with Sting, when we were presented with a set of circumstances we didn't anticipate. Not going to litigate that again here. We all know the story. But with the exception of that evening, I never once was in a position where Hulk or anybody else had agreed with a story that had been laid out fundamentally, and then came in at the last minute and changed your mind. What we would do once we ask the question, okay, going back to the example, it doesn't work for you, brother. Okay, tell me why. We would address the why. And at that point, it would become a pretty collaborative effect or reaction, meaning the writers, producers, bookers, whatever you want to call them, my team, myself, Kevin, depending on the talent involved, perhaps the talent that Hulk would be working with would get involved. Hulk would be involved. We'd try to figure out a solution to the why. And 999 times out of 1,000, we did. Now, you could argue it was a better idea because of the challenge. Hulk or somebody else threw a flag, or perhaps it wasn't. But that was the process. It wasn't, like I said, we didn't spend months or weeks even laying something out and present it the day of and go, what do you think? That didn't happen.
Well, they didn't lay out any ideas for months and weeks to The Rock for him to approve. So I feel like you took a sidebar there. I want to repeat my question. When the Hulkster would stroke that Fu Manchu and say, that doesn't work for me, brother, and now that message goes back to the writing room, And now it's pay-per-view day. It's show day. The hay's in the barn. The tickets have been sold. The pay-per-view buys have been made. We've got their money. And now we're going to change the story. And as you know, Eric, I think a lot of our listeners sometimes think you can change one guy in one segment and it only affects that one guy in that one segment. You know that's not true. It affects the entire show. If you change one segment, you change everything else on the entire show by some sort of ripple effect. How would Kevin Sullivan and company feel when everything they've been working on, day of, nope, now it has to change? Is that a positive thing? Are they looking forward to that? Or is it a negative reaction? I'm just asking.
It depends. If the solution to why it doesn't work for me is a better idea and a better outcome, everybody would be thrilled to death. If it's just an absolute brick wall, they're going to be frustrated.
Do you think the Rock at WrestleMania was a better idea? What happened this year at WrestleMania was a better idea, or was it a brick wall, in your opinion?
I don't think it was a brick wall, but I don't think it was a better idea.
There's no chance it was a better idea.
It would have been a better idea not to involve Rock at all. Yes. That would have been a better idea. Unless there was a commitment to be a part of the end of the story, then there's no reason to be a part of the beginning of the story. So what we said the night of.
Let me ask you this. Do you think, I'm not asking this to be a smart ass, but you're going to think I'm being a smart ass, but I'm trying to make a point to the audience and I want you to hear it all the way. Do you think Triple H called Ari Emanuel and said, will you call The Rock and see if he'll come to Elimination Chamber for us?
I have no idea. Maybe. I doubt it. But I do think a plausible scenario would be Ari, Nick, Triple H, probably Bruce, any number of other people associated would have had a meeting and said something to the effect of, how are we doing an Elimination Chamber? If the response came back as soft, we're not doing as well as we thought we would or we could, then I think the next natural step would be, what can we do? Somebody throws out a Rock card and Ari picks up the phone and calls Rock. I've seen that scenario play itself out hundreds of times in WWE and WCW. So I think that's probably more plausible than a Triple H picking up the phone and calling Rock and saying, hey, buddy, we need some help. Could you come and help us out? I don't see that, but I see Ari doing it as his agent and business partner.
I'm just saying, I don't believe that this was a Triple H call. I think that The Rock was called by Ari Emanuel, or he called Ari, or whatever. And this was just sort of forced upon Triple H and company. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't want to be Triple H. He took a lot of heat, and maybe he deserved it. Maybe he didn't. I think the politics are pretty obvious here, and I think again, because of who Rock is and the gravitational pull and the success that comes with him, generally speaking, I think there was an accommodation made that they wished they wouldn't have made because it wasn't well thought out or executed.
I want to show you how fans are reacting to this tweet from Dave LaGreca. Everything The Rock does is overanalyzed by fans, but one of my favorite follows on Twitter is the Andrew Dice Clay, and he posted this with regards to The Rock's tweet today. The Rock knows what he's doing with that line. Of course, the line being, Dave, feel free to join John, Cody, Brian, and the rest. Doesn't feel like he's too shy about flexing who The Rock is and his power. That's the way fans believe it and perceive it.
Double J, Jeff Jarrett, here to tell you a little bit about the nonstop savings happening over here at SaveWithConrad.com. Are high credit card balances holding you down on the card? If you're looking to give a guitar shot to your credit card debt or give your home the push it deserves with some upgrades and remodeling, you need to go to SaveWithConrad.com. That's right, SaveWithConrad.com. Conrad and his team are routinely helping My World listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. Oh, did I mention you get to skip your next 2 house payments? Take a cue from The Last Outlaw. because if anybody knows how to get the bag, it's me. Strut on over to savewithconrad.com today and see how much money you can save for free. That's right, it's savewithconrad.com.
NMLS number 2129, equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com.